And a lot of philosophies and again, I just want to say this, also when we talk the 12 steps here, somebody might say to you, hey, AA is a cult or something like that. But no, it's a compilation of all these philosophies, from ancient Greek philosophies to all the Eastern, Western philosophies. They put it together for us in what's called an instruction book. I mean, it's just like you can get a table and put it together, a shelving unit, right? And I always had like a couple of screws left over, so that's my life whenever I try to figure it out. But we have the precise directions, and these are the directions that people in Eastern, Western religions and everywhere said, because the whole idea was to be transformed above, to rise above the human frailties, to be in the world but not be of the world, right? The selfishness, the old ego. And so anyway, step 11 is the one where it's sought through prayer and meditation, right? We come to that point where we get centered. And again, I always say the answer I come to is that when I'm centered is that it's really not a problem, right? Even, look, let's take the worst problem. Let's like my own death or somebody here. Your death is only when you're relating to the self, or if people around you, something happens to them, we're still thinking of the self. Oh, how am I going to get on? What are my emotions going to be? Oh, the person's gone. Or even in our relationships and love affairs or whatever it is, we're always about the self. We're not thinking about the other person doing well, so we're thinking it's all related. Can you imagine the freedom and joy you'll have in all of these things? Even when they're, people always say, oh, look what happened to me when I was younger. But we really don't have a choice. And it says that in one of the things it says in the book here, it says we don't have a choice in life. Either we're going to go to the bitter end, being miserable, going to the jumping off point, or we're going to have that spiritual awakening. And it says that the doctor's opinion, he realized the only answer to these alcoholics was a spiritual awakening. And in we agnostics and throughout the book, it says there was no other solution. And every story in the book talks about at the end, that spirituality, spiritual awakening, that transformation. And what happened to these people. So step 12 says, having had that spiritual awakening. So the spiritual awakening comes, and I'm just going to read one thing in here, and it's in We Agnostics. And here it talks about this man who was in the hospital, and he couldn't understand. They were trying to tell him, hey, change your thinking, they were saying, to a higher power. Right before they told him about their spiritual experience, he was talking to people in the program, and he said, and they said to him, who do you to say there's no God or higher consciousness? It's on page 56. And so he said here, this man on the bottom, last paragraph, page 56 in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, this man recounts that he stumbled out of bed to his knees. This is talking about humility. Finally, he got to his knees, right? That's what we need to get to the point where we finally surrender. That's what we're doing here, believe me. And if we don't surrender, we'll be miserable to the very end. And it says here, in a few seconds. Now, people come in this program 5, 10, 20, how many years? He's talking about this man was really upset. So the spiritual transformation, he says, in a few seconds, was overwhelmed by the conviction of presence of God. And I'm also going to say a higher power, higher consciousness. He got out of the self. And it says here, it poured over and through him with the certainty. Listen to this language, this beautiful language here. This book is amazing. And majesty of a great tide at flood. The barriers, all these defects of character he built through the years was swept away. How many times I try not to be angry at people. I try not to get upset. I try to read. I had shelves full of self-help books. I asked 1 million people. It's saying here, the barriers he built, all the anger, the fear, the deadly sins, depression, all the gluttonous feelings, all the lustful, all of these sins, all about the self, melt away. Step 6 says willing, but step 7 says humbly. When we get humility, he got on his knees. He finally decided that the whole world wasn't about, he wasn't the center of the world. We're just one little cell and one little speck of the world. But, and when we realize that, then we could feel the vibration of the whole world. And the whole world can, at that point, then yes, the whole world could, as I quoted, can surrender to us. And we can appreciate and walk out of house and nature and people and feel the vibrations of the universe. So he said here, and then he says, the barriers he'd built up through the air swept away, he stood in the presence of infinite power and love. What do we stand in the presence of? Being resentful, upset, these lower, that's finite. We walk out of the house, we're looking down, we go to work, or we're fearful. What if somebody at work says something to me? What if a clerk in the store doesn't treat me right? What if somebody in the highway cuts me off? That's the way we walk around, through self-centered fear. And they said this is the way of strength. And a lot of people say, how is letting go and surrendering strength? It's all the strength in the world. Just try it. And like this man let go. And he said here, he stood in the presence of infinite power and love. He stepped from the bridge to shore. So what, do we want to go from bridge to shore or spend the whole lives in a prison? This is like, look, think of like Alcatraz prison, right? Right? In prison, that's the way we run our lives, in solitary confinement. So he's talking, there's a bridge. You can go off that island to shore, he's talking about here. And then it says, for the first time, he lived in conscious companionship with his creator. Now, let me just say here, I know we all have different ideas of what our higher conscience is in, but for me, and what I see is it was in there all the time. God was in every man, woman, and child it talks about here. The spirit of the universe, higher consciousness, whatever you want to call it. We were created in that image to be happy, joyous, and free. And the way you know is when you read this and you read that third step prayer and have humility. When you walk out of the house with humility, or when you're in your house with humility, you won't need to climb Mount Everest. You won't need to go someplace else geographically. You won't need to be successful. You won't need to make $1 million. You won't need to go into a meeting and have everybody there like you. Matter of fact, you'll be able to be in poverty. You'll be able to walk into a meeting, say a 12-step meeting, and 100 people will be there, and every 100 people there would not like you. Or you could think they don't like you, like we usually do. But they're believing, they're thinking themselves. But we can be in all, the serenity prayer says change. The only thing I realize I could change is me and my thinking. So right now we could be happy right here at this meeting, being on Zoom, the amazing technology, being here with other people. But no, we got to think of that one person, that one thing, that one situation, my health or this, all of these things, the thing is that, it's all spiritual, even the body and all of these things, it's all material. So we get out of material and go above it to spiritual. So he says here, it says, this was our friend's cornerstone fixed in place. No later vicissitude had shaken it. His alcoholic problem been taken away. So that's so beautiful. No later vicissitude means nothing else. No matter what happened, the earthquake, the world, a war, a virus, or whatever, whatever it is in life, the joy and happiness is here. So we don't have to live in fear anymore. That's a spiritual awakening. Okay, that's it. Step 12 says, having had these spiritual awakening and practicing all our fears, mean all day long.